October 12th, 2016. Newcastle, England. A young woman is brutally murdered inside her home.
Please, I've just come back to my flat and the door was locked, so I crawled through the window and my flatmate's covered in blood in the bathroom.
Police respond to the scene, and a murder investigation is launched. It becomes apparent that the victim has previously been in contact with the police.
You could hear in that call the sheer terror in her voice.
It says at the bottom he won't contact me, this will be the last I hear from him, but he's said that a lot of times and he never does seem to stop.
Police immediately identify the victim's ex-boyfriend as someone they would like to interview.
Every case of murder is terrible, but this is one that will live with me for my entire life. I've never encountered a case with a defendant so callous and manipulative.
He basically just would not accept that the relationship was over.
If he couldn't have her, nobody could.
This is the heartrending story of Alice Ruggles, how her killer's escalating behavior should have raised red flags, and how tragically her death could have been avoided.
I don't think I've ever encountered a case when there were so many missed opportunities to stop him killing Alice and for Alice to be protected.
This is the worst stalking case that I have come across.
There's this horrible pause where it dawns on her that he's not going to be arrested.
Christmas Eve, 1991, Leicestershire. Alice, a beautiful baby girl, is born to Clive Ruggles and Sue Hill.
We live in a small village in Leicestershire. It's called Langton. There's only about 150 people live here. We've lived here since all our children were born. We were a close-knit family. We had 4 children, and Alice was the third of our 4 children.
Alice was bubbly, cheerful. She wanted to be everybody's friend, and when she was a young teenager, she was the person everybody wanted to be friends with, and so she'd walk in the room and she just attracted people, and she just was very, very happy.
She always had this incredible empathy. I can remember that even from a fairly young age. She'd sort of work out how you were thinking and what you were thinking and if you were depressed or something. And she'd, if she detected that, she'd come out with some ridiculous joke or anecdote. She'd always be trying to cheer you up. And she'd succeed. And she became one of those people who would lighten things, and she would come into a room full of people and there was a bit of an atmosphere. She'd just get everyone going and laughing. So she had a real talent. Empathetic was the word. Alice was very close to her elder sister, Emma. They would do many things together as sisters do. They had different interests, and Emma was always very good at sport, and Alice always liked sport, but she struggled to find a sport that Emma wasn't inherently better at. And she eventually found that. She went on a PGL course when she was about 11, I think, from school, and discovered fencing. And Emma had tried it once and hated it. And I think that may have been a motivation for Alice, but whatever. But she actually got really, really good at fencing, and she started to train, and she became eventually a member of the East Midlands squad, youth squad, and would travel around doing fencing matches.
She absolutely loved fencing, and she decided that was going to be her thing. After a couple of years, she was the Leicester champion for her age, and she won the competition for that. A couple of years later, she won the adult competition for Leicestershire as well. She was also the East Midlands champion for a long time as well, so she's quite successful at it. And it was such an important thing in her life that was how she chose where to go to university. So instead of looking at where does the course I want to do best, she was looking at where does the course I want to do, but also has a very, very good fencing club. And that is why she ended up at Northumbria University in Newcastle.
When Alice decided to go to university, she was influenced in I think where she was going with a degree, she was in a family with kind of scientific engineering side. In fact, most of our others landed up in different fields of engineering, effectively. Alice decided, because she also had this artistic flair, she decided that she was going to do a degree in product design, which sort of mixes soft engineering with the sort of artistic design side. But once she got to Newcastle, she discovered that she loved the place. And so she did her 4 years of her degree there. But when she finished, she decided that Newcastle was somewhere she wanted to stay.
She then got a job with Sky working on the telephone. So her job was to pick up the phone and try and persuade you that actually you didn't want to cancel your subscription. You actually wanted to subscribe to Sky Sports and Movies Plus or all the other things that you needed to do. And she did enjoy that job too, because overall Alice was a people person. She loved talking to people and getting to know them and being with them. Alice was very happy. It was interesting because she liked to be in a relationship with someone. And when she was working at Sky, she wasn't in a relationship with anyone, but she was totally happy with how she was. And that was a really good sign that the job was right for her, because it didn't matter that she wasn't in a relationship. It just meant that she could get on with life. You know, at one point we're sort of seeing it that she's at the absolute peak of her life because everything's going well. She's really happy, her job's going well, she's got a lovely flat, she's sharing with some people she likes, she's got so many friends that she just was really happy.
She always loved the idea of travelling, and she got the opportunity in 2015. A friend of hers, Jen, was planning a trip to Sri Lanka. So she spent these 2 weeks in Sri Lanka with Jen. And she absolutely loved it. And they had a lovely time. And of course, being of their age and generation, they were sharing pictures and other things on social media. Now, Jen had a friend at university who still followed her on social media, and his name was Trim Dillon. But he messaged Jen to say, "Oh, I've seen your friend, and could you put her in touch with me?"
He was looking at the Facebook photographs that Jen posted on the holiday, and he messaged her and said that the girl she was with was the most naturally beautiful person he'd seen, and could they introduce them? And at the time, Dylan was a serving soldier, and he was actually in Afghanistan on a non-combat role. I thought that this was someone Alice had met and was actually seeing quite a lot of, but in fact, Alice hadn't met him. And this happened in October, where they started talking on Facebook, and they got on really well and chatted a lot. And he was obviously quite lonely because he was a soldier serving abroad. And so it was nice for him to chat to Alice.
When Alice came home for Christmas that year, we got the impression that he was a boyfriend, the way she talked about him. What we didn't realise, that she'd never actually ever met him.
Alice and Dylan's relationship accelerates quickly, and there are troubling signs.
The relationship is becoming very intense very quickly, bearing in mind they've never physically met in person.
It wasn't until January that they actually met face to face. And yet by December, Alice had changed her Facebook status from being single to being in a relationship.
Christmas Eve was Alice's birthday. And even on her birthday, she was concerned about staying in touch with him. And I think he sent her a couple of messages about seeing other people, which upset her rather.
And I remember her saying, I said to her, "Where's Jen? Have you seen Jen recently?" And she said, "Oh, I'm not friends with Jen anymore." She said, "We had an argument." She said, "Harry says I must never speak to her again." And that rang a massive alarm bell for me that, that's not right at all, that someone should tell you who you can be friends with. What I didn't realise was that Dylan had actually engineered the argument between them, and he'd fuelled it. And it was a really effective way of isolating her from her friends.
January 2016, Newcastle, England. Online daters Alice Ruggles and Tremont Dillon meet for the first time in their 3-month relationship. Dylan is on leave from his army tour in Afghanistan.
He came down to Newcastle and stayed with Alice for a week, and she said they had an absolutely wonderful time and that he was lovely and he took her out and he was very gentlemanly and he paid for things. And then they had a week in Edinburgh and they had a lovely time there as well. They saw all the sights of Edinburgh where Alice had never been before, and it was a lovely time.
Certainly after they'd spent those 2 weeks together in January, I think she was besotted with him.
Alice rang me at that time and said, "Mum, he's just amazing. I actually think he is the one."
When Dylan finishes his tour in Afghanistan a few months later, Alice brings him to meet her parents.
We first met him together with Alice. It was on the May Bank holiday weekend. You know, he was a personable enough lad.
Truman had been brought up in India. He was of a Sikh background.
He was an only child. He talked about there being servants to the family, so they're obviously reasonably affluent. But he also talked about how spoilt he was. And he did say, "I always get my own way. I always get whatever I want." He was obviously quite westernised because his Indian accent was barely present, and I was actually quite surprised to discover he actually was Indian because he just sounded like he'd lived in Britain all his life.
He was at university, I think, in India, then finished 2 years of his university education in the UK, in Edinburgh.
He joined up with the British Army because that was the only way that he could stay in Britain.
This clean-cut image, this is somebody who's got a responsible job. He's ticking all the boxes in terms of his career, notwithstanding his occupation and his background, you know, in terms of how he is with Alice, the positive comments, the praise. This is a good, decent person.
I remember when he left the house that we both said to each other, "What do you think then?" And Clive said, "Yeah, he was just trying to say what he wanted us to hear." And that was really good description of what he was like, in the sense that he just wanted us to think he was going to look after Alice and he was going to be kind and nice to her.
That first weekend, everything was fine, but they came down again for the second bank holiday weekend. And by that time, only 3 or 4 weeks later, things seemed to have changed a little bit. And it was odd because I remember the fact that he spent an awful lot of time trying to buy a car on his phone and basically ignoring her. And she was visibly upset by that. That I suppose was the first sign that there's something not quite right here, because he wasn't giving her the attention that you'd think he would, especially in front of her parents. He just seemed to be kind of absorbed in his own thing.
As the relationship continues, Dylan's behavior becomes more cruel.
He'd quite often make not very nice comments about her, so comments about the fact that she had a bit of a big nose and that she had hairy arms and all sort of things that he was really trying to undermine her confidence.
They're spending all their time together, and friends and family have noticed that Alice isn't sort of available in the same way that she was previously, not going out unless they're together. Things weren't as happy as they perhaps should have been or were initially. They're using each other's devices, tablets, phones, you know, so he has access to Alice's iPad or tablet or phone, and of course any accounts that are on there legitimately at the time.
Dylan's behavior has become increasingly more jealous and controlling.
I remember Alice saying, "Mum, he rings me up every morning and he wants me to send a photograph so he can see what I'm wearing. And that sounds lovely and caring." And that was how Alice saw it. She'd message him from a party and saying, "I'm at a party, you know, it's really lovely." And then he'd come and pick her up and she said, "Mum, it's really lovely, he just wants to see me. He's just come down, driven all this way from Edinburgh to see me." And so when you're in a controlling relationship, it's quite hard to see that. It's quite hard to think, actually, I'm being controlled here. Dylan said to Alice, he said, "Don't worry, I've got some money. I'll buy a flat that you can live in." And this was another worry for me, because in my mind, they'd only just started this relationship, and there's something wrong with someone saying, I'm going to buy a flat for you to live in. It just didn't sound right at all. But fortunately, Alice found somewhere to live with a friend from work, and so she didn't end up living in his flat under his control.
A good way to describe his behaviour is one of possession. And of course, you don't possess people, you possess objects. And when we start to see those signs that somebody's becoming dehumanised, I own you, you are a possession, you are chattel. It starts to open up those ideas about power, control, ownership. We start to see this bind being created in a relationship where people's vulnerabilities, their niceness, their good nature is sort of used against them in the most abhorrent way. And we start to see those signs, changes in Alice's behaviour, arguing with her friends, falling out, losing weight, not being this happy person that she previously was. Something is going wrong here.
It's difficult as our family, because when we look at Alice, we don't see someone who's controlled. We see a really strong, independent, lovely, bubbly person. How can that person have been controlled? And it's really hard to accept that that might have happened to her.
It's hard to conceive how affected someone must feel in that situation. I mean, every moment of your life, in every different way, this other person either knows where you are, who you're with, or they might know. I mean, this is now controlling your entire life, and that's how it was for Alice.
24-year-old Alice Ruggles is in a relationship with Tremont Dillon. The couple visit Alice's family in Cornwall, and Alice reveals that Dillon has been keeping secrets.
The family have a history, long-standing tradition of going on holiday, I think, to Cornwall.
Alice had decided she'd had enough of him before that holiday started. And the reason is that Alice had a message on Facebook from somebody who she didn't know, who said, there's something about your boyfriend you need to know, and that he's been on Tinder and he's looking for other girls, and he found me and he wanted to go in a relationship with me. So I looked at his Facebook and I found that he was in a relationship with you, and you need to know that that's what he's doing. And Alice tackled him about it, and he first of all denied it completely. And then he said, oh, somebody else had set up a fake account. His story had changed again, and he knew exactly who it was, and he'd done it because he didn't like Alice and he wanted to cause a rift between him and Alice. And I remember Alice saying, I don't think he actually knows what the truth is, Mum. I don't think he even knows what the concept of truth is. He just says whatever he thinks you want to hear at that point.
Alice did end the relationship. That was the line that was crossed, if you like. But this wasn't a clean, amicable break. This was anything but.
He basically just would not accept that the relationship was over. He basically messaged her all the time. So her phone would be buzzing and then buzzing again and then buzzing again.
It was relentless. It was constant.
Dillon at this point has been rejected. And to somebody like him, a narcissist, rejection is hugely insulting.
Dillon is stalking Alice online, and given his knowledge of her conversations, he believes he's hacking her social media.
He did pretty much had unfettered access to her Facebook. I think he also had access to WhatsApp through the web-based service as well. So he's privy to who Alice is communicating with. He's privy to conversations between Alice and her mum, Sue, via WhatsApp. And of course, they're discussing things, her thoughts, her feelings, and also her other online activity. Who is she looking at on Facebook? Who's she communicating with? And actually, she is speaking to another male on Facebook.
Alice had been starting a new relationship with a man called Mike, who was a colleague of her sister's.
And almost instantly, Dillon found out about this, and Alice had told nobody about it. She'd only talked to Emma about it. So how did Dylan know?
He says, I know you belong to another man now. So it's a very clear sign that he has dehumanized Alice. Mike knows everything. Alice, has explained the situation. And when Dylan contacts him saying that Alice is cheating on him, it tells you something very clear about what he thinks. This is far from over.
Alice's new relationship is another trigger, and Dylan's behavior escalates again.
It was Emma, more than any of us, who began to think of this as stalking. We didn't know about the level of danger that was involved in this. We, like Alice, assumed that at some point he would just give up and move on and go away. As soon as the control within the relationship is broken because the relationship is ended, then the perpetrator needs to exert that control in other ways. It's a trigger that actually makes the need for control worse. And of course, then the stalking is an attempt to regain that control.
Alice has never been in a situation like this before. She tries to be reasonable. She tries to be nice, to let somebody down gently, to appease them. But that isn't working. Dylan had in his possession intimate photographs of Alice and used these as a way to threaten her. This is to coerce her, to blackmail her, if you like, back into a relationship. If you don't get back with me, I will publish these images. All your friends and family will see the type of person you are. Now, for Alice, who's got loads of friends on social media, for private images like that to be published would have been devastating.
Dylan's sinister behavior continues when he deliberately scares Alice when she's home alone.
On the 30th of September, Alice is having a night in. She's not going out with her friends. She gets a weird phone call from him telling her that he's in the garden. And Alice said, what, my garden? And he said, no, some gardens in Edinburgh that they'd visited. And Alice thought that was really strange. And then a little bit later, the doorbell rang. And when she went to look, there was nobody there. And that kept happening. And she was really, really unnerved at this point. And she's been quite anxious about locking the flat, making sure all the windows are shut for quite a long time because of the way he's been behaving. Eventually, she goes to bed. And when she goes to bed, she hears this knocking on the window. And so she opens the curtains. And he's standing there, having put some flowers and chocolates on the windowsill, and he's stepping back from the window.
During that journey home, he leaves a message for Alice, which is to a phone, a voicemail, in which he says he just wants to prove to her that he won't harm her. And he repeats about 5 times an assertion that he doesn't want to kill Alice.
They were very strange messages, in fact, because she'd never been saying to him, to his face, I think you're going to kill me or hurt me. So why did he keep saying this to her? And actually, the way we advanced that as a theory was that he was basically saying to her, these are the things I am going to do to you. You know, he was expressing there what he was thinking, that he was going to hurt her, that he was going to kill her, and that he knew that she would be frightened of that.
Petrified, Alice phones the police and explains what's been happening.
Good evening, Northumbria Police. How can I help you?
Hi there. I just need a bit of advice, really, more than anything. So I split up with my boyfriend about 3 months ago. Since then, I know that he's hacked into my Facebook and also my phone. He's been sending me a lot of messages, even though I've asked him not to contact me. And then tonight, I had a knock at my door. And, he'd sent me a message saying I've been in the garden since 5. I had a knock at my door. And then when I went and looked, I've got like a little, the thing that you can look through. And there was no one there. And then it happened again 2 or 3 times. And then he's come round the back, knocked on my bedroom window at the back of my flat, it's a ground floor flat. He stood outside and he's like left some flowers and chocolates on the like outside windowsill, and like he walked off. He's not done anything, but I'm concerned. I've been putting off, like my friends have been telling me to call the police. I've been putting it off, but I just feel a bit like shaken up tonight.
It can be classed as harassment.
That is fundamentally wrong. At that first opportunity, which may be the only opportunity for us, the police, to get this right, we potentially have set that case on a course towards catastrophe.
For the director of police to know, and we can issue them with a PIN notice, which means if he ever comes near you again or contacts you again, he'll be arrested. We'll see if we can make an appointment to come and see you.
Yeah.
In the morning.
Yeah.
We'll get the details.
Thank you.
So the idea is that we'll come and speak to you, Alice, and we'll go and give him this official document that if he breaches this document, if he breaches, if he contacts you further, then he will be arrested. It sounds really sort of attractive. What it actually does is create this false sense of security.
After this, Alice is reassured. She's been told that if the PIN notice is taken out, if he contacts her again, he'll be arrested, and she believes this. That was on the 1st of October, and in those days that followed, she became happier at work, she regained her vitality. The people at Sky noticed that she was reverting to being her old self. She felt protected. There were issues with how news about the PIN notice got through to him because he's in the military. So the decision was made to have the military tell him about the PIN. He was told about this PIN by his superiors. When he found out, he then, one of his first reactions was to send her a package. And so 7 days later, she receives a package on the 7th of October from him. And it contains, I think, a couple of T-shirts and things she'd left with him up in Edinburgh. It says in the letter to the company, I'm sending you all these things because I've found out that you've gone to the police. He's obviously, you can read between the lines of the letter, he's obviously angry about that.
As Dylan has broken the conditions of the PIN, an official document that forbids Dylan from contacting her, Alice Ruggles calls the police again.
Hi there. I've been in touch with the police. Somebody's been issued with a PIN so that they can't contact me. However, I've had a letter off them.
What was the content of the letter? Was he?
So pictures of me and him, because he's my ex-boyfriend, so a notebook that I sent him when we were together, and a letter that he knows I called the police on him, and he's had everything confiscated, and all he has to himself is a pen and paper and an iPod, and explaining why he came down last Friday. It says at the bottom he won't contact me, this will be the last I hear from him, but he's said that a lot of times, and he never does seem to stop.
So do you want to call back to discuss this?
There's this horrible pause where it dawns on her that he's not going to be arrested.
Yeah, what's usually what happens with it?
Okay, well, I'll let them know you want someone to contact you back, just to discuss what can be done.
Okay. Will it be the police officer that's been dealing with my case?
I can't guarantee who it'll be. I'll let them know you've got your PIN notice there, so it's going under a breach of it.
Okay.
Is there best time to phone you back?
Any time really will be fine. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, bye.
Thanks, bye.
And we don't have a phone call of the callback she eventually received, because it was them then calling her. And it was a lady now on the phone, basically at some point said to her, well, what do you expect us to do about it? Arrest him? At that point, it's almost you hear the moment when she suddenly realised she's not being protected. By this stage, Alice is truly frightened of Dylan. Colleagues from Sky are bringing her home every evening to the front door in their cars. Maxine, her flatmate, is with her as much as she can, but obviously there's times when she can't be there.
A few days later, on October 12th, 2016, Maxine, Alice's flatmate, returns home.
Please, I've just come back to my flat and the door was locked, so I crawled through the window and my flatmate's covered in blood in the bathroom, and she's lying covered in blood. She's blue. She's only 23. I mean, knew this was coming. Her ex is an absolute psychopath. She put in a complaint in about her ex, and she phoned 101 at the weekend to report that he's tried to get in contact, and he says we're going to do nothing. Now this has happened.
Police teams are dispatched to Alice's home, and detectives are immediately tasked with trying to locate ex-boyfriend Tremont Dillon.
By the time we got the horrible call at the door at 2 o'clock the next morning, they'd already arrested him.
October 12th, 2016, Northumbria police have located Tremont Dillon at his barracks in Edinburgh and are arresting him in suspicion of the murder of his ex-girlfriend Alice Ruggles earlier that evening.
So police had gone into his barracks. They caught him climbing out, attempting to climb out over the wall rather than signing out. We assume this was to go and establish his alibi.
They wore body-worn footage. That body-worn footage showed that he had scratch marks on his face and on his chest, and that those were fresh and recent scratch marks. The footage revealed the police recovering his clothing, outer and under clothing, one item at a time, making sure that it wasn't contaminated.
While Dillon is being held in Newcastle, police are busy gathering surveillance video and other forensic evidence in the hope of linking him to the murder.
We knew that when the police had gone into the flat, they hadn't been able to find Alice's phone. And that meant that somebody had taken it, because we had seen her on her phone when she arrived back at the flat that afternoon.
Remarkably, they actually have film of Alice arriving home that day, and it transpires that if someone has a cam on their car, then even when they stop the car and turn the engine off, that continues to function for a minute or two. And so it seems that a neighbour's car was parked, and during that minute or two, after the person had left their car, Alice was dropped at home. And so that we actually have a timed video of her arriving for the last time in her flat.
She'd been in contact with her boyfriend using that phone, so somebody had taken it. And the evidence was that the phone was being used, that is, it was connecting with masts, consistent with it travelling north back to Scotland with Tremont Dillon. And then it stopped being used altogether. But it stopped being used altogether after Alice was dead, after her body had been discovered. So we knew that that phone was with Tremont Dillon. And that was a really important piece of evidence, because if he was telling the truth and that he had been caught up in this tragic accident in which Alice had died, why was he stealing her phone? Why was he taking it with him back to Scotland? And why was he trying to use it? What it revealed was that he was still obsessed with who she'd been contacting, who she'd been messaging, and he was wanting to go through her phone and interrogate it.
They picked up on various CCTV cameras that are around the place, pictures of his car coming into Newcastle, driving up her road, and that's how they know that he'd arrived there and was waiting for her. The evidence soon became clear once they got all this from the CCTV. Without a doubt that he'd been there, he'd driven to her road, and later after it happened, he'd driven out of Newcastle. And with the pinging of her phone on the way out of Newcastle, it's absolutely irrefutable.
Dillon initially lies about his whereabouts and concocts multiple stories about where he was.
His first attempt was to say that he'd been shopping. He's then confronted with telephone evidence that shows that he was in Newcastle. So he then constructed his second account, was to say that he had been to the house, he had seen Alice, but that she had come outside and that she had shouted at him, called him a creep and scratched his face, and that he'd left. So in that second version, he said he'd left her alive and well, without any injury, and had driven back to Scotland. It was only then, when he was confronted with the fact that her blood was in his car, on his Help for Heroes bracelet, and on his clothing, that he came up with his third version of events, which was to say that Alice had accidentally killed herself with a knife in the bathroom of her home.
Dillon is formally charged with Alice's murder. From the evidence collected, investigators can now tell how the last terrifying moments of Alice's life played out.
Alice is in the living room, happily WhatsApping with Mike, in fact, because they were due to meet in 2 days. Mike was coming over. And sort of Mike's they were exchanging all this stuff about what they're going to do and all the rest of it. And then suddenly Alice's messages stop?
He came in through the rear yard of the property and climbed in through a window. The disturbance in the bedroom suggests that Alice had seen him there and there had been some sort of struggle in the bedroom. And the way the flat was configured, she had run for the bathroom, which of course is the only room in the flat that had a lockable door. It was at the back of the flat. So it was a place of safety, but it was unfortunately a dead end. She got into the bathroom and there was a footprint mark on the outside of the bathroom door and some damage to the lock. And what all that suggested was that she'd got herself into the bathroom. She tried to lock the door while she was being pursued by Dylan, but that he had kicked the door open, forcing the lock, and then he had attacked her inside the bathroom. Dylan had knelt on her back, pulled back her hair and slit her throat, and had been drawn so deeply and with such force across her neck that in fact her spinal cord at the back of the neck had been notched by the knife.
Dylan's trial starts in April 2017. In preparation, investigators have found more digital evidence, as well as ex-partners of Dylan's that tell a story of jealous behavior, control, and stalking.
They all spoke of a similar pattern of behavior, that he would form a relationship very quickly, that there would be a great intensity to that relationship, but that he would become controlling during the relationship, and that he could not cope with rejection.
He already had a legal framework in place to control and regulate his behaviour towards an ex-partner.
On the 10th of October, unbeknown to anyone at the time, he drove all the way down from his barracks, 120 miles down to Newcastle, 2-hour journey, and went after dark to her back window and photographed those windows in her flat, and then drove all the way back to Newcastle, 5-hour round journey.
I think that Harry Dillon thought that he would take his chances, that there was a chance that a jury might believe his story, that there was a chance he might be able to charm them, and so that's what he set out to do. And so we presented a very clear and compelling case. We demonstrated all of the false accounts that he'd given, and we demonstrated to the jury just how controlling and manipulative he was. But he gave evidence over the course of 5 days. He was giving evidence. 2.5 days to his advocate and 2.5 days in cross-examination. And in cross-examination, we exposed his account for the lie that it was. And we demonstrated through cross-examination just how manipulative, controlling and obsessive he was. And in fact, his evidence at trial was all an exercise in control. It was all about exerting control over Alice's family until the bitter end, taunting them effectively and tormenting them. But worse than that, it was about him saying to Alice's family, "This is your fault. If you hadn't interfered in our relationship, she would still be alive." He actually said to Alice's father at one point, "You couldn't be there to protect your daughter."
It takes the jury less than 2 hours to return a verdict.
The jury retired shortly before the lunch adjournment, and then they came back early in the afternoon and unanimously convicted Harry Dillon. His reaction to being convicted was one of a complete lack of emotion, but that's what he displayed throughout. He spent 2.5 days describing to the jury in graphic detail how this woman who he supposedly loved had bled to death in front of him. Not once did he cry, come close to shedding a tear, show any emotion.
The judge pointed out that he'd lied from the beginning to the end, that it was patently clear that he'd gone along intending to murder Alice.
Harry Dillon was sentenced to life imprisonment, and the judge made a recommendation that he should serve no less than 23 years in prison before he could be considered for parole.
After this justified result, what could have been different?
I don't think I've ever encountered a case when there were so many missed opportunities to stop him killing Alice and for Alice to be protected.
The family looking back may have thought, could we have done something else? Could we have stopped this? But Dylan was a maniac. He had full intent that night to come down and murder Alice, and he has still not admitted guilt for the murder that he committed, so he is still maintaining control.
I think there's still an enormous amount of ignorance about stalking and about how dangerous stalking is, about what it says about the person who's committing the offence. To get to the point where you're stalking a person in the way that Dylan was stalking Alice demonstrates that you have such disturbed thinking and such an enhanced sense of self-entitlement that you're becoming extremely dangerous. And I think we need to have much tougher sentences for stalkers. I think we need to take stalking much more seriously. And there needs to be a far deeper intervention with these people who commit these offences to stop them going on, as sadly happens, to commit murders such as this one.
What is changing to avoid more incidents like this from happening?
There has been lessons learned from Alice's murder, mandatory training for officers, for victim support staff in stalking, and training for people to understand the way stalkers behave and what increases the danger to victims.
Increasingly, the public are becoming more aware of stalking and its risks. The publicity around cases has grown in recent years. Awareness in agencies has grown. There were some national recommendations. At the time of Alice's case, the threat to disclose intimate photographs was not a specific criminal offence, so we'd made a recommendation around that. That is now in legislation.
Clive and Sue set up the Alice Ruggles Trust to raise awareness of the dangers of stalking.
We had to do something so that people didn't end up in the same position that we were in, giving poor advice to their family members and then watching them being murdered. That second phone call to the police could have saved Alice if they'd arrested him. And we wanted lessons to be learned. How do we make sure that lessons are learned from this? And it sort of made us realise that that's our job now, to make sure that lessons are learned from it. I spend quite a lot of my time talking to people about the last few months of Alice's life. And I have to make a really big effort to think that Alice's life was not just about those last few months, and that I really want to remember Alice for all the positive things rather than just really horrific things.